Nah, come on, they wouldn't be doing that. But it's cute. It's such a charming little sunshiny place. Oh. Yeah, okay. January 18th, 1941. Your army is not as strong as the enemy, and it is not as strong as your ally. And you end up fighting your ally in the field. And yet, even though you lose the fight, in the long term, you win because you gain more control of your army and more international support. You are Mao Zedong in January 1941. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Thai forces invaded the French protectorates Cambodia and Laos. Chinese communist and nationalist forces attacked each other. The Greeks took the strategic Cyfrowe Pass, and in the Mediterranean, Luftwaffe dive bombers based on Sicily changed the general strategic outlook in the whole region. This week on the 16th, the Luftwaffe strikes again. They attack Valletta, the Maltese capital, and the Grand Harbor. The carrier Illustrious is hit once again, even as engineers are repairing her after last week's action. Over 70 German dive bombers attack the Grand Harbor. 10 of the attacking planes are shot down, but 200 buildings in Valletta are destroyed, dozens of people killed. This is the first in a series of raids that the Maltese call the Illustrious Blitz, but marks the hard beginning of the Battle of Malta. Air raids there will rapidly increase in ferocity and frequency. On the 18th, a German raid on Wieke airfield by 85 dive bombers destroys 6 British bombers on the ground and renders the airfield unusable. Malta is of enormous strategic value, being the main Allied base between Gibraltar and Alexandria, the ends of the Mediterranean. Had Malta fallen to Italy in 1940, Britain would have been split in two in the region, which would have had big repercussions for North Africa. But Benito Mussolini had not attacked in the summer and fall, and then the Battle of Taranto had compromised his surface fleet. So for both the Italians and Germans, air power is now the key to the fight for control of Malta, the fight for control of supply lines from Europe to Africa, and indeed for the Mediterranean. North Africa is simmering this week, though, as British and Commonwealth forces make ready to attack Tobruk. As at Bardia last week, it's going to be Ivan Mackay and the Australians who will make the main attack. Also, like before, one of his main problems will be getting his tanks past the anti-tank defenses. However, the Tobruk defenses were similar to those at Bardia, but as the perimeter was twice as long, and there were only 20,000 men to defend it, hopes of a quick success were high. Speed was particularly important, as otherwise there would be little chance of capturing the valuable port installations before they could be sabotaged. I will drive home again how important it is to take the port, and thus provide a viable alternative to the overland supply and communications route from Alexandria, which only gets longer and more fragile as they advance. A sea route would make a huge difference to the rest of the campaign. The plan for the attack, which will happen next week, is for one battalion of the 16th Brigade to break in before dawn on a narrow front in the southeast and make a gap for the tanks and the rest of the brigade to enter. They will then push in deep while the 17th Brigade and the Armored Division Support Group stage diversionary attacks in both the east and the west of town. Enemy artillery must be taken care of as soon as possible. As at Bardia, there will be naval bombardment from the coast, and the RAF will command the sky. Also last week, I talked about the setup for the coming British attacks against the Italians in East Africa. The first of those is to come out of Sudan, and it is supposed to begin this week. Facing William Platt's 2 Indian divisions is Luigi Frusci. He has 3 divisions and 3 separate brigades in his command, so he outnumbers his enemy something around 2 to 1. That is a big advantage, but as Andrew Stewart writes in First Victory, the British and Commonwealth forces were, however, better prepared and equipped for a campaign based on maneuver. And Frusci was worried about the challenge of defending an area that he believed favored mechanized columns. Frusci has no anti-tank weapons, should the British choose to deploy tanks there. And though he does have some armor, it is no match for that of the British. The British also have the big advantage in the skies, in intelligence, and in morale. Frusci thinks the British will attack his communications with Kassala from the north, so he withdrew his northern flank forces weeks ago, planning to stand his ground and fight a defensive battle. The high command in Addis Ababa and Rome, however, went further than Frusci. They felt the time had come for withdrawal, which they told Frusci to prepare. Since the enormous disaster that had overtaken Italy and Libya, the only role left for the Italian East African Empire was protracted defense in order to delay as long as possible the transfer of British reinforcements to Egypt. Frusci argues that there will be too much damage to his and Italy's prestige if they give up territory too freely, but he argues in vain. He has to follow orders and evacuates Kassala and Tessanai on the night of the 17th. Forward forces are to fall back and concentrate in the triangle made by Keru, Bishia, and Aikota, where the foothills begin. Plat's 0 hour is to be the 18th, but it has moved to the 19th, tomorrow, so we'll see what happens there next week. Now, though, we see the effects of last week's fighting over in China. That fighting between Chinese nationalist and Chinese communist forces, who should be cooperating against the invading Japanese, has prompted the National Military Council in Chongqing to deactivate the communist New Fourth Army units that were doing the fighting and arrest General Yi Ting. The main body of the New Fourth Army remains in Jiangsu and Anhui provinces. But though the nationalists won, they really lost in terms of public relations. The immediate response from most outside observers was not that communist troops had refused to obey orders, but rather that Chiang had treacherously turned on his allies in the hopes of defeating his domestic enemies while ignoring the Japanese. Mao cries treachery, and even Time magazine writes, "This was a victory for the clique of Chinese generals who hate and fear the communists." But it was no victory for China. What has kept the communists fighting for Chiang is the fact that they fear Japan more than they fear Chiang. If Japan, or Russia, could convince the communists they have less to fear from Japan, or Russia, than from Chiang, Chiang's jig would be up. As Dick Wilson writes after this infighting, relations between the two parties, supposedly in alliance against Japan, now worsened to a point where no further military collaboration was possible, weakening the Chinese war effort. Well, yeah, and Chiang now cannot really force the communists to head north or drive them to attack him, so he abandons his immediate plans. For the Red Army, it can develop now without worrying about Chiang interfering. And Shang Yang had been a rival with Mao, and his defeat and disgrace last week, well, and his death, I'll hop into the future, he gets murdered March 14th, only benefit Mao Zedong in his struggle for total control. So the New Fourth Army incident, as it is known, while a field disaster for the communists, is a PR coup and a turning point for Mao Zedong. But Southeast Asia is seeing battle action in the field this week in the Franco Thai War. On the 16th comes the Battle of Yangdang Kum. Thai forces had advanced from Poipet at the border and made from Sisophon, but they had gone round the French to the north and planned to hit Sisophon from the northwest. They hold a line of villages from Yangdang Kum south to Kum Kaub. Their move on Sisophon is preempted by the French, though, who attack the Thai flank with Group Mong Jae. This attack hits Yangdang Kum and the village of Phum Priev. Thing is, the French have literally zero intelligence of the enemy or the land, and the Thai are pretty well entrenched, so the French must eventually retreat. The Thai, however, are unable to follow up, as French Foreign Legion artillery stymies any advance by Thai tanks. The tanks that the four Thai armies have, by the way, are a mixture of Carden-Lloyd tankettes and 6-ton Vickers Mark E's. The French were overrun in Laos last week, and with things not looking good after this action in Cambodia, French Admiral Jean Decoud's Naval Squadron Groupe Occasionnelle makes for the Thai-Cambodia border. The squadron is under direct command of Capitaine Berenger and attacks a Thai naval group at anchor off Ko Chang Island, 6:30 a.m. the 17th. They destroy 2 torpedo boats and seriously damage the coastal defense ship Thonburi, which ends up grounding on a sandbar after fleeing. But the whole situation is pretty inconclusive so far. Other than the fighting in the field, there are a bunch of political notes this week. On the 13th, Adolf Hitler invites Tsar Boris of Bulgaria to Berlin to basically ask him to do the same sort of thing he asked Francisco Franco to do in Spain: join the Axis powers, open his borders to German troops for their attack on Greece, and take an active military part. Boris declines, just like Franco did. That same day, Joseph Stalin has a conference with his commanders about the possibility of fighting a two-front war against Germany and Japan. He says Russia must prepare for this, and it would be a war of mobility. So infantry units must be more mobile and smaller in size. But since it would be a mass war, they had to maintain a ratio of at least 2-to-1 over any enemy at all times in order for a breakthrough to be possible. On the 17th, Stalin's foreign minister Vyacheslav Molotov meets German ambassador Friedrich Werner von der Schulenburg in Moscow. The Soviets are surprised that they have not gotten an answer from Germany for their offer back in November to join the Axis powers. Schulenburg says that Germany has to discuss it with Italy and Japan first, though we saw in November that Hitler told everyone just to make no response at all since he has no intention of the USSR joining the Axis. And that ends the week. With active fighting in Cambodia, the after effects of fighting in China working to Mao's advantage, ever more fighting in the central Mediterranean, and new fighting about to happen in North and East Africa. It's interesting how even a loss can be a victory. The communist forces were clearly defeated last week, and yet we now see Mao ascendant as world public opinion descends against Chiang Kai-shek. But it has to fall somewhere, because parts of that world are helping supply and finance China's fight against Japan. And when those two Chinese factions are using those supplies to fight each other, that can only be good for Japan. So someone has to take the blame. And it was Chiang who ordered the Communist Army to head north in the first place. It seems to me that both locally and politically, Chiang and Mao are playing a game, one with big international repercussions, and it is a very dangerous game indeed. Now, this is not the first time Mao Zedong has suffered a defeat against nationalist forces and still come out stronger. And if you'd like to learn more about that and the Long March, you can check out our Between Two Wars video on China in 1935 right here. Any minute now, it's going to pop up. Our patron of the week is Stephen McDowell. It is patrons like Stephen McDowell who make sure that this show grows bigger and bigger and better. That is the truth. So please support us at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. Subscribe. See you next time.